Hello, good morning. Welcome back to the Alaska SeaLife Center for another virtual visit. As always, my name's Alex, and we've got Taylor out here again. And it might
Hello.
look familiar back behind us if you tuned in last week. We were over in like that corner. It was a different angle, but same location. So we're out at our Rocky Coast Discovery pools today, which are our touch tanks. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. I hope everyone that was waiting for the show to start enjoyed those little shrimp tunes. We're going to be taking a look at them a little bit later on. But first, as always, we want to thank our sponsors. So Royal Caribbean Group has made it possible for us to bring these to you live this year, which has been really, really fun. Just making sure everyone has an opportunity to visit the SeaLife Center, even if you can't make it here in person. That's the point of these virtual visits, is just to get everyone here. And if you were here, this is our sunrise for the day. It's pretty boring. I'm not going to lie to you.
No, it's not.
It is.
Well, the sun rose at 6:42 this morning, and guess what time the sunset is tonight, Alex?
Tonight,
Tonight.
are we getting? We must be getting close to like 10 somewhere, right?
And
Like, are
we're
we like 8?
9:12.
9:12.
9:12.
I was gonna guess like 8:50 or something.
You can see the sun high up in the sky right there.
Yeah. At the beginning of this clip, here's the loop. That's the very beginning. That's 8:30 in the morning here. So the sun was already up. It's out of frame because as the sunrise gets earlier and earlier, the sun is rising further and further up the edge of the bay. I couldn't think of it. Resurrection Bay. So it kind of moves further north along the side of the bay, and it's no longer even in view. But for anyone who tuned in last week, this is quite the change because last
Absolutely.
week we had that big like snowstorm that came in for I don't know 10
Which I'm
minutes.
thankful for that we don't have any snow right now. I was able to like sit on my back porch and just enjoy the sunshine the last 2 days. It's been great.
You don't appreciate the snow.
I like the snow. I think I'm ready for the snow to be gone.
All right, so for today's program, as I mentioned, we are out at the touch tank. And so we're going to be talking about those shrimp that we saw at the beginning.
Mhm.
But we're also going to be talking about some of their relatives. And so we're talking about crustaceans today, specifically the crustaceans that we have in our touch tank.
Yeah.
And so the previous program where we did crustaceans, we talked about the king crab, which is like the biggest crustacean we've got here. Now we're going to be talking about some of the smallest crustaceans. And so what can you tell us about crustaceans? What are they?
Crustaceans. Well, they are in the phylum Arthropoda, or
Okay.
coda,
What does
depending
that
on who
mean,
you
though?
talk to. It means jointed legs.
Oh, okay.
So if you've seen any crabs or hermit crabs, you may notice that their little legs have little bends in them. They're their little joints. Well, that,
Right.
the prefix arthro is talking about joints. So you can totally see their little jointed legs, and they move along the bottom of the
Yeah. Think about like insects as well. Like
Yeah.
that whole group is in arthropods. They've got those little jointed legs, but we're talking about crustaceans.
Right.
And so when we are looking at these animals, they are pretty hard. They do have an exoskeleton. They don't have a backbone or anything because they are invertebrates.
Right.
And we're going to start with probably the most common. If you come out to the touch tank and you're checking out the animals in there and you find a crab, it is probably a wide hand hermit crab.
He's probably my favorite in the touch pools, except for the pygmy rock crab, which we'll get to,
We'll get to that
in a while. But yeah, you can see this guy. He has that one front right, really wide hand, which is how he gets its name.
That's the name.
Yeah, so he uses that wide hand in front of his shell to kind of like block himself.
Yeah, and there's a fancy name. Well, I don't know if it's used in crab, but if you've seen like a snail that can pull itself in the shell, and we'll talk about snails in a little bit. They oftentimes will have a little door that closes the shell behind them. That's called an operculum. And so this wide hand on our wide hand hermit crab, when the crab pulls itself all the way into the shell to hide, that wide hand kind of acts like an operculum. It acts like a door on that shell to protect them. But it's only the one claw that is really big. The other claw is quite small. And they do use that claw, their left claw, I suppose. Here you can see one of our wide-hand hermit crab kind of digging through the sediment, looking for food, looking for anything to eat, and that's what they'll use that small claw for. And there he found something, brought it on up to his mouth.
So this is a different kind of shell
This is.
that we saw.
This
So
looks like maybe a moon snail.
that's what I was thinking. It was a moon snail shell. But typically you'll also see them in the previous clip that we had. They were in those hairy triton snail shells.
Yep. So that's the thing about hermit crab, right? Is that they do live in these shells. They don't make those shells though. Those are shells that they find. So when a snail, passes away, it's going to leave behind that shell. Eventually, the snail kind of just rots or gets eaten by something,
Yeah.
and the shell is left behind. And that's an opportunity for the hermit crab to come along and tuck on into that shell and make it its home. And so they don't make the shell, which means that they have to find new shells. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But as you mentioned, the common shell for our wide-hand hermit crab. In fact, I can just pull that back on up here probably. The most common shell is the hairy triton. So that's this sort of shell there.
Now, rumor has it this is the state seashell of a state along the Pacific
I
coast.
wonder where you learned that from. But yes, this is the state seashell for Oregon. And in fact, the species name, I don't recall it off the top of my head, but it does have Oregon in it for that hairy triton. Now, we do have other hermit crabs here. So this is a Pacific red. As the name implies, it is quite bright. Again, it's got that big claw, right? The right claw. So, only one crab gets to get the name wide hand, but most of them have this. Although not all of them have it. We're going to see a couple here that don't have quite so pronounced a claw. But the red, you'll see them around. They tend to catch your eye just because that super bright color. Then we've got two more that are a little duller, and the claw is still bigger, but it's not huge.
No, yeah.
So what is this one here? This is a blue spine.
Yeah, a blue spine hermit crab.
And
also in the hairy triton snail shell.
Yeah, they're all they like the hairy
it's like their
triton.
favorite.
But the thing about the blue spine in this doesn't look particularly blue.
No, it doesn't. I don't really understand where it got its name.
In fact, there's more blue, I would argue, in the clip we had of the wide-hand hermit crab. But
agree.
It already was named wide-hand hermit crab. And then finally, we've got this one, which I love. This is a bearing hermit crab, which I love, as you mentioned, right, jointed legs.
Yeah, it's a great shot of their jointed legs. You can really see they're like, it's like a light blue, maybe closer to white, those little bands. In a minute here, when we show some tinier crabs, those teeny tiny crabs are bearing hermit crabs.
Oh.
They're so small.
So we mentioned before the shells, and we said, well, they're using the hairy triton shells. So we're going to show you what happens when you grow out of your shell, or what happens if you don't have a shell. We actually managed to find a crab that was just wandering around without a shell, because they find these from a dead animal. They don't grow it, which means that as the crab grows, it's going to outgrow its home.
Right.
Now, if you tuned in for the king crab, we actually talked about molting, which we have some molts here. We can actually show these real quick. The molts are what they have left behind when they shed their skin. So we keep these at the touch tank. They kind of look, I don't know, a little grody sometimes, but it's their leftover skin. So I guess it is kind of grody. But it's really cool to be able to get one of these and sort of dry them out. They do this as they grow. But eventually, they kind of have reached their max size, and they'll also do this just to refresh their skin. If it gets any little nicks or cuts or tears or anything like that, this will help them to refresh that skin.
You see this little hermit crab
I like the little tiny hermit crab there.
It's kind of missing its little back part there.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, because
that's
not as strong an exoskeleton on the hermit crab's tail. It is much softer. So when they are growing, that means that they are changing their skin, but they can't change that shell because some other animal made it.
Right.
So what happens? Well, as they get too big, they'll look for other shells. So you'll just kind of see them shopping around. Just recently, I was searching around for a new house, for example, and much like the crab, we're trying to be like, oh, is there enough space for us in this house? Does it have the features we want? And so the hermit crab actually needs certain types of shells. Spirals, for example, have to be just kind of the right size of spiral. You'll see the crab reaching in there with that really big claw, like, oh, how much space is in there? So they do actually really inspect these shells. Now, how often would you say you see them? Every once in a while, one's kind of eyeballing a shell?
Yeah, all the time. Not all the time, I guess, but very often you'll be like, oh, he's just like checking it out. He's just shopping around.
Yeah. And the thing is when he's out of that shell, he's going to leave the old shell behind, and another crab might come along and get that. So we do try to have a variety of sizes and shapes in there.
So you're saying as they grow, the shell will have to get larger, the one that they're looking for.
The one that they're looking, each shell that they look for, they're going to have to find a bigger one until they're like full grown, and then they will sort of find shells of roughly the same size, but maybe not as cracked. So here's this little tiny guy who we found. This is a little tiny wide-hand hermit crab. I mean, teeny, teeny, tiny. This was like, I don't know, the size of your fingernail almost, like a thumbnail.
I mean, look at the size of the rocks.
Yeah, he did not have a shell. So we actually went and found him a little shell. We were like, oh, you need a shell because they're very vulnerable without this shell. Their back tail is kind of soft. It's squishy.
Very. And at the end of that, actually, it's a cool word called uropod.
An uropod.
And it's basically an appendage that they use to secure. You can kind of see it.
Yeah, you're going to see
back
it
there.
unfold here.
Yeah.
It unrolls.
And it's what they use to secure themselves into the shell.
So there it goes. Going to tuck the uropod
Mm-hmm.
down into the shell and make sure it fits around that spiral. And then be like, you know what, maybe. And they've got some like little leg, like little appendages in there that kind of lock him in place.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just going to snap the shell onto his back. There he is.
It's a very quick process.
It's pretty quick.
I didn't think that it was that quick.
Well, you got to be quick with it, right?
Like, you see
if
the little bubble
the
that came
bubble
out,
he
the little
squeezed out,
air.
yeah. And then he had this, he was hauling around. But it's got to be a quick process because if you think about, if you find a new shell, you don't want to be out in the open, like
Right, no.
taking your time getting into that new shell because you're vulnerable this whole
Except for
time.
this guy.
Yeah, this
He
guy
was just cruising
wandering.
around.
I
He
don't,
was just careless.
I don't know what
happened
happened to his old shell.
So, Alex, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So from Nick Elementary.
Nick
yeah,
Elementary.
Yeah. So how do you take care of crabs?
Oh, okay.
There's a multiple.
There's
multiple.
we'll
We're
do
gonna
these
have to
kind
get
of
into
one
all
at a
of
time.
them.
And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to type those in the chat, or you can text us that number we run at the beginning as well. But how do we take care of them? Well, the nice thing is that crab are scavengers in a lot of cases. They're at least very opportunistic. So we don't have to be like providing live prey for them or anything like that. They just kind of get like chopped squid, chopped fish. They don't even necessarily get fed every single day because they'll just find a little meal, they'll eat that meal, and then they'll kind of hang out for a day or two because they're full and they're not like running around all the time. So they're pretty low maintenance compared to some of our other animals here.
I will say, I have seen our aquarists here taking little bits of krill
Yeah.
and like individually handing them to a crab, and then they'll like reach up and grab it. And
That
bring it
is
towards
something
their
that
mouth.
they'll
It's
do.
probably one of my favorite things to see.
Yeah,
Because they're like,
they do
thank
grab
you,
it.
and they bring it down.
So we do target them. So sometimes we do, if you've seen like previous videos where we broadcast fed, where we just throw food out over the water. For the touched pools or the discovery pools here, for the hermit crab, we will target them where they'll actually hand them the little piece of krill. And that's because they're really mobile. They're probably the fastest animals we got in there because they can cruise around. But they also, they'll steal from each other. Like if you don't put enough food in there, the crab's gonna be like, all right, that crab's got food. It's gonna run over and like grab it from them. So for that reason, when we do feed them, we basically go and like make sure you had one and you have a piece and you have a piece. Make sure everyone's got a piece so that there's no fighting over the food.
That there's no fighting.
It is very
Okay.
cute.
So
Another question from
what is the
Kinnick Elementary here.
oldest and youngest crustacean do we have?
Well, the youngest, we have like some unhatched crustacean we're gonna see in a little bit.
Do.
So those, arguably those are the youngest, right? They are negative days old. But we're waiting like any day. I was actually hoping they'd be hatching today.
They're supposed to be hatched by March.
They're so
like
close.
the end of March.
They're
They
so
should have
close.
already basically been hatched.
So we have some that are like negative days old. But the oldest, certain species can live, decades.
Yeah.
And here at the SeaLife Center, we actually have some of our hermit crab have been here for like 20 years almost. So our oldest crab's probably like 20 something.
Yeah. Okay, why do they live in the spiral shells?
So when we saw that tail, and I can actually pull that back up. What was the name of the tail? The
uropod.
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 So we'll pull this up again, and I'm gonna fast forward back on up to where we saw the little guy getting in, because they have to have a spiral in their shell, because they will actually wrap that tail around the spiral. That's how they get a really good hold on it, is that they will wrap on in there. So you'll see this tail kind of uncoil. And then when it coils back up, you can it's even twisted off to the side. It's twisted the direction that shell spiral is going to go. So that's why they need that spiral shell. Now, they can make do without spiral shells, but they really prefer the spiral shell. And that's because it really gives them that nice, secure grip when you imagine that tail kind of wrapping in there.
All right.
More questions.
More questions.
I
this
love
is
it.
awesome.
Yeah, we got lots of questions today.
Okay.
We'll try to get to all of them here.
We will. Which hermit crab is the rarest?
Like here at the center?
I have no
don't
idea.
know.
I wish I knew that
Yeah,
answer.
sorry, I don't know which of ours is the rarest, but here at the center, the most common that you'll see are these wide hand, and probably the one you'll see the least. I think we only have one of the blue spines right now in the touch tank. We might have two.
In the touch tank, yes.
But we definitely have a
there's only
bunch
one.
of the bearing because
Yes.
a lot of our little baby crab that cruise around, about the size of this wide hand in the video now, a bunch of those are apparently
Hitchhikers.
bearing. Yeah.
And they're hitchhikers. They come in like on the rocks.
They come in on the rocks.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna come back to Connect Elementary because we've got another question from them. It looks like, but we're gonna try and grab one here.
Ooh.
Uh-oh.
Couple of questions.
Oh no, I see this question coming. It's always the question I fear.
What is the difference between a shrimp and a prawn?
All right, difference between shrimp and a prawn. Our spot shrimp here are also frequently called spot prawn, and this is confusing because some like cultures will just call like anything shrimp like a prawn, or vice versa. Anything is shrimp like is a shrimp and not a prawn. Sometimes it's like culinary, like when it's cooked, it's a prawn, and when it's not, it's a shrimp, or vice versa. And there's lots of things that are called shrimp that aren't even that closely related to each other. So it's pretty loose. Like, what's the difference?
They're pretty synonymous.
There is, I found it one day, I can't think of it off the top of my head. There were some scientists like, this is a mess, we have to clean this up, we have to get order here. And they were trying to do something where it was like the bend of the back of the shrimp or prawn, like how much it bent or whether it bent, determined whether it was a shrimp or a prawn. But unfortunately, it's all very unclear. Here at the SeaLife Center, we do call them spot shrimp, but you'll also hear folks call them spot prawn. And I've seen both names used on menus and that sort of thing, because of course people love to eat them. Another question here.
Yes. How enormous is the biggest shell that an Alaska SeaLife Center crab came out from due to molting that can be shown to us?
Oh, like show you the shell. I'm not going to pull the shell out of there. We never pull shells out of the touch tank because we tried and
like
you never know if someone's hiding in it.
4 or 5 inches?
Yeah, probably about that size. I mean, it was big. And the problem is like we could not find another shell of that size. So I think the spiral wasn't even quite right for the crab that was in there. He was always trying to find a new shell, that crab was, and never happy. Like, it would move into a new shell and be like, oh, excellent. And then it would sit in there for like an hour and go right back into the old shell. But yeah, once they get up to about that size, it's tough. It's tough to kind of shop for them as far as shells
So
go.
what if they can't find a new shell?
They will make do.
They have to.
Yeah.
They will have to.
Yeah. They'll make do in the shell they have for as long as they can. And once we get to that size, it's not really a danger where they're outgrowing it, but they will. It'll get like cracks in it, the shell will, or holes or nicks and dings, and they don't want that. They want a new fresh shell. So yeah, it's not a huge problem, but sometimes we can't find a bigger shell for them.
Okay, do crabs lay eggs or do they give birth to little crabs?
Oh, we're gonna get to that because it's for all the crustaceans. They will lay eggs. Yeah. That's a great question.
More crabs will put them like as they like. I believe they start on like their abdomen and then they will like put them on their shell.
Some, yeah. So there's different ways of doing it. Some of them will really hold those eggs for a long time. They'll brood the eggs to the point where like basically the eggs hatch out from the crab. Like, so it's almost like it's giving birth to the live young. But the eggs have been laid. They just then get tucked underneath the tail and they hang out there. All right, I'm going to pull up our next clip here, and then we can keep looking at some questions because we're getting a lot of.
This is awesome.
This is great. This is fantastic to get these questions. But we talked about kind of our youngest, and we're not looking at just the youngest yet. But we did mention we have a lot of tiny little hitchhikers that come in. So there's a hairy triton shell, and there's a teeny tiny little crab, not quite big enough for that shell yet. So just kind of give you an idea. It's tiny, and it actually passes another arthropod here, another crustacean that I believe that is an amphipod, which is another animal that occasionally gets called a shrimp, but kind of creeping around on the rocks there. Oh, another question here. What do we got?
How big can hermit crabs get? This is from Mason.
Well, so there are giant hermit crab. In fact, I want to say the coconut crab, which is a huge land crab, is actually a hermit crab, but it's big enough it doesn't really need a shell. Yeah. So the coconut crab would probably be the biggest that I can think of. Now this is fun. So we talked about the molting. This was a crab who could not find a shell small enough for it, but it did find the molted claw that looks like a Pacific red.
Pacific red, yeah.
And it's living in that. So there's not a spiral in there. It wasn't necessarily happy. And actually, we ended up offering that crab another shell, and it tucked on in. Now, this is giving us a preview of our next crab. This is a tiny little decorator crab. And those weird little beebles on it, they look like little beads or little bearings. Those are little sponges, we think. They could be sponges, they could be algae that it has stuck to itself. And this is how small this crab is.
That's my finger.
It's coming on in.
It's like smaller than my fingernail.
Yeah, tiny, tiny. He's like, whoop, don't touch me. So, yeah, we always try to be real gentle with these animals. And when they're that small, we don't even really touch them. We usually just put our finger next to them and see if they, like, sometimes they'll come over and they'll kind of be like, what are you? But for the most part, they're like, it's giant. So we try to be real gentle with them. More questions.
More questions. So all of these are about hermit crabs, it seems like, so far. So can their shells get broken by another hermit crab?
Ooh, I don't know.
Theoretically.
Hypothetically,
yeah,
but it would be easier for the crab. If there was like a crab trying to kill another crab, it would more likely just attack it from like the opening and attack it there. Because the shells are pretty thick. These snail shells are actually quite thick once we get to that.
What is the total number of crabs at the SeaLife Center?
Hundreds, probably, but these tiny ones.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's not even talking about our larger crabs, like our king crab. We have a bunch of lyre crabs around, decorator crabs around, tiny hermit crabs.
The tiny hermit. That's the thing. That's the thing. Is we keep finding these tiny ones, and like when they have eggs, they have like hundreds of eggs.
Yes.
So we have many, probably many more than we actually know about. So we're gonna take a look at another clip. We're gonna keep doing questions, but I want to get through our crab here. So this is another decorator crab. This is a pretty big one. This is called a graceful decorator crab, and I don't know why it's called graceful, but in my head it's because it's got these real long, slender like appendages. The claws even are really, really long, and that's useful because they use those claws to reach onto their back, and that's how they'll stick things on. So this crab has some algae, some little pieces of algae stuck to it, little pieces of seaweed, and they stick these on to sort of camouflage themselves.
Yeah, they're little like Velcro-like attachments, basically, where they'll take it and they'll stick it to themselves.
Yeah. So you can see it's kind of like a fuzzy, spiny-looking crab, and it's almost like Velcro, where if it just pushes the sponge or the coral or the kelp onto it, it basically sticks there. And some decorator crabs, right? They're called decorator because they decorate themselves. Mm-hmm. Some will even use like stinging organisms. They'll pick up small anemones or small polyp animals and stick them to themselves. And now that crab has a better defense than just camouflage. It stings things, right? Because it has picked up something else that stings and stuck it to itself. And now it has that defense as well. Another question from Connecticut Elementary here.
Yeah, do they eat other crabs?
Yes, so crustaceans are very much cannibalistic even, like it doesn't even have to be a different species of crab, but we keep them well fed enough here that they don't bother really, and that's, you know, if we just didn't feed them, yeah, they're going to turn on each other, they're going to eat each other. Out in the wild, certainly, you know, if it's opportunistic to eat your neighbor because there's no more food around in the area, they'll do it, but here we try to keep them well fed enough that they don't even think about it. So here you got that graceful decorator walking, and that's why I think it's a graceful decorator, like why it gets the name.
They seem very slow and gentle.
Yeah, grace is kind of a misnomer, I feel like, as it just steps on its neighbor.
Right,
here.
honestly, you're right.
Yeah, it's kind of rude.
It's trampling the Pacific Red.
In fact, this crab, I think the Pacific Red here gets a little bumped, and it's like, whoa!
Whoa!
Yeah, so you can see they can pull into that shell there.
Okay, so another question.
Okay.
How do hermit crabs manage their waste products if they only leave their shells when they need a new one?
Yeah, they can basically scoop it out. So they'll kind of work it up with like the little appendages, and they'll move it out from inside their shell. Yeah, mm-hmm. They can get stuff out of there, and like you saw that bubble like got popped out of that one shell. They can work like air out of there. They can work waste material out of there, that sort of thing.
So whenever a decorator crab sheds its skin or molts,
yes,
does it have to get its camouflage back?
That is a fantastic question. And yes, they do have to get it back. Now, sometimes they'll take their old molt and they'll like pick the stuff off of it. They're like, oh, this is really good stuff. And they'll re-stick that to themselves. Sometimes they just start fresh.
It's so bad that they'll have to just start over. Like they've been working for like months and months and months. Like, this is the perfect amount of red algae, perfect amount of anemones. And now they're like, I guess we're starting fresh.
Yeah, they do have to start over though. When they molt their skin, all of that decoration that they've stuck to it comes off with the skin. Sometimes they'll pick the old stuff off, but sometimes they'll just be like, no, now I'm gonna start fresh.
That's a great point. Okay, another question from Rory. Do you save animals at the SeaLife Center or are they delivered to you? Yeah, let's elaborate on that.
Okay.
Like, how do we get these hermit crabs?
Yeah. So you might have heard that like the SeaLife Center has a wildlife response program. We just had a thing up on Facebook about an elephant seal, for example, that was in the bay. She was kind of looking bloated and cut up a bit. So our wildlife response went out to that animal, brought her back and did some like treatment here. And then we were able to release it back out in the wild. So we do have animals that like we get a call about an animal in need. We'll go get it. We'll bring it in. Hopefully we can release it. Sometimes they're not releasable, but we can treat them and then either we'll take care of them or another facility. So that's how like some mammals will get here is that way. Other mammals have been collected for research studies, for example, either here at the center or other facilities. And then once that study is done, that animal can't be released back out in the wild. Someone has to take care of it, so we can do that. And that follows for some of our birds as well. We actually only have 2 birds in the aviary, I believe, that are actual rescue birds. But the rest are either they were hatched here, they're from other facilities, or there's some that were part of studies that the study has concluded. We take care of them. When it comes to an aquarium animal, our aquarists are much more proactive. They will go out, they'll do beach seines where they'll kind of walk along a beach with a little net. And part of that is monitoring. We're trying to see what's in the bay. Is there something that shouldn't be there? We've been part of invasive species studies in the past looking for, you know, like a species you don't want here, but we know it comes in on ships, for example, that sort of thing. So we monitor, but if we ever happen to find something, we're like, that's cool, or we don't know a lot about it, or, oh, we need another one of these at the center because we have one and really we need 2, then we'll bring that back. So for aquarium animals, they're almost all collected. Occasionally we'll get one. We've gotten like an octopus or 2 from another facility, for example, that maybe they were doing a study and they were like, well, we're done with the study. Can you take care of this octopus? And we're happy to take care of these animals. But yeah, for aquariums, they're mostly all collected or hatched here. All right, I'm going to show real quick because we talked about that decorator crab. I want to show what they look like when they're really well decorated because like the one that we looked at was not super well decorated.
Oh, don't give him that.
I know.
He tried.
In the touch tank, they don't tend to get too covered. We've shown this in a previous episode before, but here is some algae. Once we focus our camera, there's some algae. And then right next door, there is a bearing hermit crab on top of some algae, except that algae is actually a decorator crab. You can see his leg. So that is a crab that has covered himself so much in algae.
He doesn't even look like a crab.
He just looks like a ball of algae. So that's what a good decorator crab looks like. Not that ours are bad, but they just don't have as much algae in there to be grabbing. And they, honestly, our graceful decorator crabs will tuck up under rocks where they're going to feel pretty secure and maybe not feel like they have to hide themselves.
So another crab that likes to do that is a pygmy rock crab. Why don't we take a look at
We can take a look at the pygmy rock crab.
They love to hide.
So here's
Check this video out.
So this is more of like your traditional looking crab. And usually you'll just see this, a little claw hanging out from underneath a rock. Or I love this. It's not a hermit crab. This is actually what it's called. Hairy cancer crab is another name for it.
Yes, it is.
But this was one just hanging out in an empty shell.
He's trying to be a hermit crab.
He's trying to be a hermit crab. He's just in there. So that's good protection for him. He can't drag it around like a hermit crab. So he has to leave there to go get food and that sort of thing. But they will get out and they'll walk around. But for the most part, they're very hidden. It's like a rare thing that we catch one out and about walking. While we were filming, we actually did manage to see one just cruising around, which I think is our next little clip here. Yeah, so this was over with the shrimp. He was just walking around.
Get him. You can see he has, oh, there's spot prawn. You can see where it gets its name by the spots there on its tail. Oh, back to the pygmy rock crab.
There we go. So the pygmy rock crab, they're pretty small. They can get quite a bit larger.
Maybe like 2 or 3 inches.
Yeah, a couple inches across. All right. So, looks like we have even more questions.
Even more questions.
I'm like just watching the screen.
I know, it's keep going off the story. I'm looking over here, trying to look off screen.
So what do we have?
How many species of crabs are there?
There's a few thousand. Like I've heard over 4,000 is a number I've seen around for crab. But there's probably many we don't know.
For sure.
And that's actually one of the fun things is even like with ours here, we'll get a crab and we're like, is it this one or is it that one? I'm going to show you a
hard.
crab that actually we misidentify every once in a while. So this is a rhinoceros crab. It looks almost exactly like a heart crab. But the difference is, well, one of the differences is how thick these spines are. So the rhinoceros crab has these thin little spines on their legs, but the heart crab has like thicker spines on the legs. That's one of the main differences. So it's tough. And you had another name for this.
Yeah, it's called a golf ball crab.
A golf ball crab.
Yes, for some reason, someone named it is to where that little divot looks like a golf ball. Which, like, I can see it.
If you look, it's tough to see, but up towards the front, there's actually its eye, and its eye has spines on it too. And so a lot of times this crab's hard to find in the tank just because it kind of hangs out in there. It's very still. It looks almost like a rock. But
what about the mouth on here? You can kind of see the mouth of the crab. Maybe we'll get a better view of it.
You got the little parts up there that are trying to catch stuff.
Yeah.
Those are actually antennae. They can sense chemicals. They look like they're grabbing, but we're running a little late today, but we're more than happy to take these questions as they come in.
Yes.
So we hope you all stick around, but if you have to go, we understand. We've got another question here.
Can crabs jump?
Yes.
I feel like they could.
Ours cannot. Ours are not great at it. Although I have actually seen, we had a large crab. Oh gosh, it wasn't a king crab. I'm drawing a blank on it. It's a type of like king crab, but it wasn't our red king crab. But it was downstairs, and it would climb up on a rock and then jump off at fish sometimes. Like it was a super like, I'm gonna get you crab. So I think it ended up getting moved out of there. But yes, so some crab can even swim. Our crab here, we don't really have swimming crab, although when they're born, they're plankton. They just drift around in the water. But some crab are really good at swimming. If you're over on the East Coast, if you're around Maryland or Chesapeake Bay, right, you got blue crab. Those are like hyper aggressive, fast crab. If there's a crab that can jump, it's going to be something like that for sure. Crab. Yeah.
Do we have any comments on the red and white striping on the shrimp legs?
Let's take a look at our shrimp.
Pull up some spot shrimp.
So we do have our spot shrimp. Comments on them? No, I don't. I think it looks cool.
I think so too.
I think it may be a form of camouflage. The thing to remember is this orange is not going to appear orange more than like 10 feet underwater. Once these animals are really down in the water, that orange is going to become like a dark gray. So it won't be nearly as vibrant. But I do love these spot prawn. They're really fun. And right now we've got some crazy stuff going on with our spot prawn. So these are all spot prawn over on the far side. But then we've got this little tank near us. Now these are all females and they're huge. And that's because spot prawn all start life as male. They'll reproduce once as a male, and then they'll become a female, and then they will reproduce as female for the rest of their life. So these ones are largest spot prawn. Not only are they female, but we have them separated out from the others in this little tiny tank because you can just barely make it out. We've got a closer shot. But tucked down underneath, there's some little swimming flaps down there. There are eggs. These are those negative-day-old crustaceans. And they actually have their eyes. You can see the eyes. I love them. Yeah. We're waiting for these to hatch. We've been waiting like a month for these to hatch. So next to the ladies there, we actually have some little juveniles. And this is a fun one because you asked about the red and white striping. When they are about this size, they're green. Ours here have this little green coloration, and they like to hide out on this kelp. Now, some animals will change their color to sort of match their surroundings. So it's possible that if we gave these if we gave these shrimp a different background, they would get a little less green, but I love their green spots on there.
Look, there's even some little blue spots.
The little blue spots on them. You see those on the adults sometimes too.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So those are the little tiny shrimp. Any other questions we haven't gotten to? I want to make sure we don't miss any. We're here so long now.
I know. I think we've gotten all of them.
Okay. If you bolt awake in the middle of the night and you're like, oh man, I should have asked this question, you can either leave a comment on this video once it's published, or you can email us at AskTuffy. That's ASKTUFFY at alaskasealife.org. And we'll be happy to get those questions answered for you. We always enjoy these questions. Sometimes we have to go searching, which is fun for us because then we're learning too.
Absolutely.
Now, a question we had last week, right at the end, was whether or not the shrimp could hurt us. Because like we talked about sea stars last week, but right at the end, someone asked, hey, do the shrimp hurt if you touch them? No. They will not hurt you. People are like, are they going to pinch you? Are they going to bite you? They don't really have biting mouth parts that they can get you with. They do have pincers, and that's going to be our last clip for today. If you watch this little tiny juvenile spot prawn, it's got these pointy arms, but then it's going to unfold, there they go, 2 little pincers there. They're the third pair back. They unfold, and they're using those pincers to try to pick up food. And the right pincer is larger. It's a meatier pincer than the left pincer. The left pincer is much skinnier. So they're almost like a hermit crab in that regard, and that one claw is much larger than the other. They don't just use these claws for finding food. They'll also use them to clean themselves. If there's something up on their back, they can reach back there with those little pincers and pick it off. But these are so small, they're not going to hurt you. And the final thing they'll do with those pincers is if one shrimp gets too close to the territory of another shrimp, it just reaches out those pincers. And like you can see, it's not doing anything. It's just waving its pincers around. I absolutely love it. These little noodles that they've got.
They look kind of like worms.
They do. But the left one skinny and long, and the right one short but stout. It's kind of cool that they have that differentiation. But they tuck them up. When they're not using them, those are tucked out of sight. Most people never even know that our shrimp have them.
What about the little horn that you kind of see?
The rostrum.
It's not a horn, I guess.
Yeah, people see the little, it does look pokey on our spot shrimp. And I mean, if you stepped on a spot shrimp in the right way, that spine could get you, but they don't like jab you like a unicorn or something.
That's why they're totally safe to touch here in our touch
safe.
pools here at the SeaLife Center.
Yeah, we don't want to put anything in the touch pool that could hurt people. Of course, like the crab, if you stick your hand right in its claw, yeah, it might pinch you. But for the most part, no, they're going to leave you alone. And so that's the crustaceans we've got here in our touch tank. We went through almost all of them, but like we said, I mean, we're always finding new ones. We're always finding little tiny babies or whatnot. It looks like we have no more questions that have come in.
Over here.
So excellent. Well, before we are out of here, we're going to thank our sponsor one last time. Again, Royal Caribbean Group has made it possible for us to bring you these programs live on Wednesdays at 11 o'clock a.m. Alaska time. So if you're over on the West Coast, a little bit later for you. Sorry. But if you're in Hawaii, a little early, a little more early morning programming.
But good thing they're recorded, so you can watch them over and over again if you want.
Yep. And we've got about another month of these as they are right now. And then we're going to enter our busy summer season here. We're going to drop back on these kind of long weekly ones, but we want to keep doing videos through the summer here and there. And then we'll be picking these back up again in the fall in maybe a little bit different format. We're going to kind of play around with some formats, but hopefully you've enjoyed tuning in for this program. Hopefully you can check out our others if you haven't seen them before. If this is your first, welcome. And hopefully we will see you next week for our virtual visit here from the Alaska SeaLife Center. So until then, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.